Before we begin, we want to take a moment to acknowledge that today's discussion includes sensitive and distressing subject matter, including child abuse, trauma, and family betrayal. These topics may be triggering or emotionally difficult for some viewers. Please take care of yourself while watching, and if at any point you feel overwhelmed, it's okay to pause, step away, or seek support. This discussion is intended to raise awareness, promote understanding, and center survivor voices, not to sensationalize harm. Today, we are discussing a deeply powerful and emotional video titled, The Shocking Story of Aziza Kibibi, originally shared by the YouTube channel Unfiltered Stories. At first glance, the title may suggest something meant to surprise or disturb, but as you move through the story, it becomes clear that this is not just a shocking story. It is a survivor's story. A story about what happens when abuse occurs in silence. A story about what trauma looks like long after the harm ends. And a story about resilience, even when survival itself feels impossible. Aziza Kibibi's experience is difficult to hear, but it represents the reality faced by countless survivors around the world whose stories often go unheard. Aziza Kibibi is a survivor of long-term childhood abuse that took place within her own family. According to the video, her abuse began when she was very young, at an age when a child should be protected, nurtured, and safe. Instead, the people and systems meant to safeguard her failed. For years, Aziza lived with trauma that was hidden behind closed doors, protected by silence, fear, and imbalance of power. This is not an uncommon story. Statistics consistently show that a significant percentage of child abuse cases occur within families or trusted circles, making them even harder to detect, report, and stop. One of the most difficult truths highlighted by this story is that abuse does not always come from strangers. In many cases, it comes from people children depend on. This creates a devastating conflict. The person causing harm may also be the person providing food, shelter, or authority. The child may not even have the language to understand what is happening, and fear becomes a constant presence. For children in these situations, survival often means compliance, not resistance. And this is something society often misunderstands. Childhood trauma does not disappear with time. It doesn't end when a child grows up. It doesn't vanish when the abuse stops. Instead, it often evolves. Survivors may carry trauma into adulthood in the form of anxiety or depression, difficulty trusting others, feelings of shame or self-blame, trouble forming healthy relationships, or a deep sense of isolation. Aziza's story reflects these realities, not in dramatic exaggeration, but in honest reflection. This is what makes her story so important. It shows that trauma is not just something that happens, it's something that lingers. A major theme throughout this story is silence. People often ask survivors, "Why didn't you say something sooner? Why didn't you leave? Why didn't anyone know?" But silence is rarely a choice made freely. Silence is often enforced by fear of not being believed, fear of breaking apart a family, fear of retaliation, fear of being blamed or shamed. For many survivors, silence is not weakness, it is survival. Aziza's story illustrates how children often learn to remain quiet as a way to stay safe in an unsafe world. Another heavy burden carried by survivors is shame. Even though abuse is never the victim's fault, survivors often internalize guilt and responsibility. They may ask themselves, "Why didn't I stop it? Why did this happen to me? Why do I feel broken?" This misplaced shame can follow survivors for years, shaping how they see themselves and their worth. Aziza's experience reminds us that abuse doesn't just harm the body. It attacks identity, confidence, and self-trust. What makes Aziza Kibibi's story especially powerful is not just what she endured, but what she chose to do later in life. She survived long enough to speak. And speaking is not easy. Telling a story like this requires revisiting pain that many spend years trying to bury. But by sharing her experience, Aziza did something incredibly important. She reclaimed control over her narrative. Her story became hers again. Survivor stories serve a purpose beyond personal healing. They validate others who feel alone, expose hidden abuse, challenge harmful myths about victims, encourage accountability. When survivors speak, they create space for others to breathe, to recognize themselves, and to understand that what happened to them was not normal and not their fault. Aziza's story does exactly that. The Unfiltered Stories video approaches this topic with seriousness and care. While the title may be attention-grabbing, the content itself focuses on context rather than graphic detail, emotional truth rather than spectacle, survival rather than victimhood. This distinction matters. Responsible storytelling does not exploit trauma. It respects it. And that respect is what allows conversations like this to exist without causing additional harm. Stories like Aziza's are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. Because abuse thrives in silence. Because denial protects perpetrators. And because understanding begins with listening. When society avoids these conversations, survivors are left to carry their pain alone. But when stories are shared responsibly, they become tools for education, prevention, empathy, and change. If you're watching this and parts of this story resonate with you, please hear this clearly. What happened to you was not your fault. You did not deserve it. And surviving does not make you weak. It makes you resilient. Healing is not linear. It doesn't follow a timeline. And it looks different for everyone. But support exists and you deserve it. If you or someone you know is struggling with trauma or abuse, please consider reaching out to a local crisis line, a licensed therapist or counselor, a trusted support organization. Seeking help is not a failure. It's a step towards safety and healing. Aziza Kibibi's story is difficult, but it is also deeply human. It reminds us that behind every statistic is a real person. Behind every headline is a lifetime of impact. And behind every survivor is extraordinary strength. Listening is the least we can do. Believing is the next step. And protecting the vulnerable is the responsibility of us all. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this discussion. If you found this meaningful, consider sharing it. Not for shock, but for awareness. And as always, thank you for being part of a community that values truth, compassion, and understanding.